Hello, welcome to the video. I thought it's about time I got on with picking my best 20 albums from 1974 in my merging series of year by year reflections on which albums have meant the most to me and which, with the passing of time, have kind of become the standard best albums as recognised by not just me but many other people as well. So I've already done pre-1972, bought my first record in 72, so I've done 1972, top 20 albums, and 1973, so now on to 1974. Now, 1974, 15, living in Newcastle with my parents, yet to go to a gig, although this was the year when I really wanted to go to a gig. I'll come on to that. Didn't make it, by the way, there's a spoiler for you. And holidays with the family, mostly camping in Scotland or the Lake District in England. I also around this time they introduced the comprehensive education system into the UK, into England, maybe the whole of the UK, but certainly it affected me being in the north of England. And what that meant was that my high school, halfway through my high school, or two-thirds of the way through my high school, where I was doing really, really well, they decided that they were going to get rid of grammar schools and secondary moderns and become just general high schools. So my school turned into a middle school, and I moved on to a much bigger, brand newly built high school, where I got terribly lost and ended up kind of having a big setback in terms of my education. More of that later on, perhaps. Listening in my bedroom most of the time to records, still listening to Roy Wood, dare I say Gary Glitter, because that was one of the first records I bought as well. I think it was Rock and Roll Part 2. But I was starting to take much more of an interest in music around 1974. I'd already bought a few albums myself, but also borrowed from friends, albums that have much more serious, if you like, for serious music lovers, and some of them have literally stood the test of time. So anyway, 1974, I'm not into jazz, but my first record is in the kind of jazz genre. It's the number 20 on my list of rundown from the best 20 albums of 1974 is Crosswinds by Billy Cobham. Now, remember, I was a kid. I wasn't listening to jazz. This is an album that I picked up many, many years later. And probably because I was interested in Brand X, which was a band Phil Collins played with, a jazz fusion band. And Collins was influenced by Cobham, and he was also influenced by the Mahavishnu Orchestra, which I've never been able to get away with. But this album, since I bought it, has been a regular on the deck. It's really, it's kind of atmospheric. So it's, jazz and, the improvisation about jazz. This is not really improvisation as far as I can tell. This is composed music. It's a suite on side one called Spanish Moss. Covers the whole of the side with 4 elements to it. Should put my glasses on. Yeah, Spanish Moss, Savannah the Serene, Storm, which is just a solo by Billy Cobham on drums, and it's wind sounds, very restrained. It does kick up a little bit of a storm, pardon the pun, in places, but it's actually very listenable and not that challenging for somebody who's not really, really into jazz. But it's you can definitely see where Brand X got their influence, and you can certainly see now, after all these years, why this is still regarded as a classic of the genre. So that's number 20. Number 19 is Between Today and Yesterday by Alan Price. Now, Alan Price was the organist in the Animals, and he's from the northeast of England. And this is a very eclectic album. Side one is kind of labelled yesterday and side 2 is today. So like side 1's full of nostalgia, making reference to the working class, the dignity of the working class in the northeast of England. And the big hit single was called the Jarrow Song, which historians might know. There was a march from Jarrow in just south of the River Tyne to London from working class men back in the day. Big protest march and walked the 300 miles to London. So there's lots of references on side 1 to that working class lifestyle, and the second side today is more about kind of living in the big city, living in London perhaps, and the modern world. So this is reminiscent of Sting's The Last Ship, if you know Sting, and that stage show that he put together and the album he put together with it. It's very theatrical. It's got kind of music hall feel to it, but also blues feel, so not surprising coming from the Animals. This is definitely, if I was ever accused of being nostalgic about music, and I'm kind of not, I've made that point on multiple occasions, this is kind of a nostalgic album, because I remember going around to friends' houses and this being played regularly. And of course, there's a certain amount of working class pride living in the north of England that the Jarrow Song, where they talk about Geordie boys, as we were, that it's making its mark on the national scene and high up in the record charts. So anyway, that's Alan Price, number 19. And I'm going to forget the numbering here. But anyway, my number 18 is Joni Mitchell and the LA Express, Miles of Isles. It's a live album. There's going to be 2 or 3 live albums in here, so make no excuses for that, because they're landmark albums. Now, Joni Mitchell, big fan, kind of. I think there's like 2 main periods in Joni Mitchell's music career that kind of resonate with me. There's the early acoustic stuff. Then along comes Court and Spark. She starts to delve into kind of jazz, kind of light jazz, obviously with her vocals over the top of it. And what ensued were a handful of really outstanding albums. And then in the 80s, she started to introduce more of a rock element into her music. And some of those albums in the 1980s do sound very 80s. Not all of them, by the way, but anyway, those 3 periods. Anyway, this covers the first period when, in my judgment, her voice was at its most screechy. So obviously it culminated in Blue, which is usually regarded as her best album, where she plays acoustic guitar, piano, dulcimer. And this album is kind of at the end of that. And there's a track on here which ended up on Court and Spark, and I can't remember whether Court and Spark came out before this album or afterwards. I suspect it came out just afterwards. Court and Spark came out just afterwards, excuse me. But anyway, this album is like a summation of the first period. And side 1 has this band, the LA Express, and side 1 has the band, side 4 has the band, side 2 and side 3 is Joni on a piano, mostly acoustic guitar, sometimes dulcimer. The band sounds a bit like a different version of the kind of sort of a Steely Dan sound. It's kind of funky, but very much in that early 70s Steely Dan type vibe going on there. I think it sounds really, really good. They butcher a few of the classics. They're not all brilliant versions, but one thing I will say is that Joni's voice, in my judgment, there's the AliExpress. Joni's voice, in my judgment, has never ever sounded better than on this album. She does some absolutely wonderful versions of songs. So side 1 has You Turn Me On, I'm a Radio, Big Yellow Taxi, Woodstock. That's with the band. Then she does side 2, Cactus Tree. Fantastic version of Woman and Heart and Mind. A Case of You is good. A Side 3 circle game has kind of got audience participation, singing along to the chorus, and that's really good as well. But yeah, it's a really good live album. And have you ever seen Joni Mitchell look as happy and as alive as she is in this particular photograph? She looks like she's having an absolutely fantastic time. But anyway, I listened to this album just the other day again, and it sounds fantastic. Great live album. Joni Mitchell, number 18. Number 17, Cooder, Paradise and Lunch. First Cooder album, bought this because of the Rolling Stone record guide that I bought back in the 80s. And I had already seen Cooder live at Newcastle City Hall. Amazingly, I don't know how Cooder came to Newcastle, but he did. And he was really good. I really enjoyed it. Really quite understated. Sitting, quite far back at the City Hall, which by today's standards is quite close to the stage. And he had, is it Bobby King? Terry Evans, Bobby King on backing vocals. Really great gig. Anyway, this album came along, and what I particularly liked on this one is the version of Ditty Wah Ditty, which is a great version. But it's got some brilliant songs on it. Fool for a Cigarette, Mexican Divorce, Married Man's a Fool, Tatler. It's 5-star album all the way. So Cooder, Paradise and Lunch. Something different, number 16, I think. I'm going to get all this counting wrong, but it's Lou Reed, Rock and Roll Animal. Walk on the Wild Side, of course I knew nothing else, but I felt as though I needed to get a Lou Reed album. And I remember shopping at Windows, JJ Windows in Newcastle, and I saw this one, and I thought, well, I'll try this. And it's got a fantastic opening, which is Sweet Jane, which has got the double Steve Hunter and Dick Wagner on guitars, and it just really rocks. So that's a great live album. There's Lou Reed Live that goes with it, but this is the one to get. Rock and Roll Animal. Number 15, I think. 20, 19, 18, 76. Number 15 is I used to have a friend of mine who was always kind of into hard rock, and he was never impressed with my appreciation of progressive rock. And whenever he tried to make some sort of a disparaging jibe or make fun of my interest in progressive rock, he'd always talk about the albums I had by this band. And this is Greenslade. And this is Greenslade's third album, Spyglass Guest. Now, Greenslade was led by Dave Greenslade, who I think was in Colosseum. So that kind of jazz-inflected progressive rock band of the late 60s. And he set up his own band. And what's interesting about this band in terms of its progressive rock is that there's very little, if any, guitar on this album, or any of their stuff, really. I mean, there is a little bit, smidgen here and there, but the truth is that it's 2 keyboard setups within the band. Kind of very jazz, lots of instrumentals. This is the most song-based album they ever did, the least progressive rock album they ever did. And it closes with Theme for an Imaginary Western, which is a Jack Bruce song. But it's wonderful. Joie de Vivre opens up side 2. Red Light, really very interesting, varied. Definitely 70s progressive rock, but with that little bit more of a jazz vibe going for it. So that's really good. Number 15, number 14. Have we seen this guy before in my listings? I'm not sure, but it's Gil Scott-Heron. This is when he was partnered with Brian Jackson. This Winter in America. Love Gil Scott-Heron. Troubled character, fiercely intelligent, great live performer. Produced a wonderful album just before he died. But this is absolutely great. But I mean, I could have picked. This is the 1974 Gil Scott-Heron, but I could have picked something from 73, 72, 75, 76. But 74 finds a place for Gil Scott-Heron. This has got his most famous track on it called The Bottle, which was a big hit. And when I was going nightclubbing back in the late 70s and early 80s, on a regular basis, we would be hearing The Bottle. on the dance floor. So that's number 1. Apologies for this. 2019, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14. It's by Tangerine Dream, Phaedra or Phaedra. Never know how to pronounce that. This is their first album on the Virgin label. So the Virgin label. There you go. There we go. That's the old Virgin label. Wonderful album. It's an album that I reach for whenever I want to play any Tangerine Dream, mainly because it has all the atmospherics and the gentle keyboards, but the mellotron comes in about 2/3 of the way through part 1, which is all of side 1, and it just it sounds so big. It's absolutely fantastic. So yeah, I continue to buy Tangerine Dream records for a number of years. But this is the one that I tend to go back to. I don't think it's the best album. I'll come to that on a later video, but this is still a great album. Next one is another live album. I have to find place for this one. It's Too Late to Stop Now by Van Morrison. I've had this album for 30 odd years, maybe 40 years now. So I wasn't a big Van Morrison fan until Into the Music came into my collection, and then I started to buy more and more. So this is from an earlier tour. This is one of the livest albums you've ever heard. The versions are quite different from the studio ones. That's why it's a bit of a landmark. I think it's probably considered one of the best live albums by anyone at any, over the whole of the rock and pop period. But yeah, absolutely fantastic live album. I won't go through the tracks, but superb. On the Back to America, I think in my 1972 video I picked an album by this artist, and I've got to put this one as well. This is Randy Newman and Good Old Boys. All of the wit and the political, social commentary is here. You've got rednecks. You've got a lovely track called Marie. Louisiana 1927. Louisiana, they're trying to wash us away. Yeah, absolutely superb. Birmingham, the greatest city in Alabama. Yeah, great album. Randy Newman, Good Old Boys. If you didn't listen to his lyrics, you would think that he was kind of a vaudevillian, kind of easy listening type singer. But love this guy, and I've got everything by him. Next one is progressive rock, bordering art rock. They get a bad rap in progressive rock circles because they had hit singles, which is such a shame for them, but never mind. Supertramp, Crime of the Century, classic album. Has Dreamer, of course, which was the big hit single, but it opens with School, then Bloody Well Right and Hide in Your Shell. The title track closes the album. They were always an interesting band in that they had two main songwriters who had very different styles, so you can really tell which are the Roger Hodgson songs and which one of the ones were the ones written by Rick Davies. So Roger Hodgson opens with School, then Hide in Your Shell, it comes third, and that's bookending Bloody Well Right, which is definitely a classic Rick Davies song. But yeah, great album. This was a folk band in the UK that turned into the work with Sandy Denny in the early years of Sandy's career and their career, but they got more progressive, and this is Strawbs, and this is Hero and Heroine, their 1974 album, which is full of great melodies. It's got good pop single credentials here as well, with Lay a Little Light on Me, but Hero and Heroine is a big mellotron based punchy progressive rock track, and the opening is Autumn, which has the Heroines theme, Deep Summer Sleep, and then The Winter Long, which again has kind of some pop sensibility as well. So that's Strawbs, Hero and Heroine. Another British band. I've lost count exactly where we are. I'll get down to the next, the top three. It'll become obvious. Never saw this band. Have recommended one of their albums once before, but this is the album I probably go back to more than others, and that's Wishbone Ash and There's the Rub. And this is where they'd had a change in lineup. They'd lost guitarist Ted Turner. The big thing about Wishbone Ash is two lead guitarists, both of which played in a very melodic, not riffing sort of style. So it's not really hard rock, although it does rock in places. But Ted Turner left the band and was replaced by Laurie Wisefield, and there was much more of a West Coast American sound on this album. So all the folk, almost all of the folk stylings of the earlier stuff, it disappeared here, with the exception of Lady J, which is a ballad on side 2. But this sounds fantastic. It leaps out of the speakers. It's like I've suggested. It's very melodic. It's kind of very. It's just so polished. Somebody's famous produced this, I think. That's probably why. Yeah, Bill. How do you pronounce that? Didn't he produce the Eagles? Bill Simzik or whatever it is. Someone's going to correct me. But anyway, that's a great album. Love it. Back to Virgin. The second album by Mike Oldfield, Hergus Ridge, which is a ridge in the southwest of England. Again, same formula, multi-instrumentalists, no vocals, side-long tracks, part 1 and part 2. This has a much less dynamic and energetic sound than Tubular Bells. Much more of a kind of a folky, pastoral vibe to it. Neoclassical maybe. But yeah, really great album. So let me just count out where we are. So 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8 and 7. Number 6. Oh! That's what happens. That's what happens when you do. Oh, goodness me. Let me just get this right. Okay. I'm back there after a short interlude when I knocked the camera over. It's number 6 on the best 20 albums of 1974 is Bad Company and Bad Co. Classic rock album. Here we've got Paul Rodgers of Free, of course. You got Mick Ralph's Mott the Hoople. What a fantastic album. Can't Get Enough, Rock Steady, Ready for Love, Don't Let Me Down. The track itself, Bad Company. The Way I Choose, Moving On and Seagull. Every single song is a classic rock track here. This is like FM radio stuff in America, no doubt about it, but every track on this album would have been on rotation back in the 70s. Sounds great. I saw them live one time. I'll always remember Paul Rodgers sauntering up to the microphone, and really quite a scrawny guy. He wasn't not a big guy, but his voice filled the place, and so bluesy and soulful, all wrapped up in one. It was an absolutely fantastic vocalist and a great gig. Wonderful album. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Number 5, the 5th best album of 1974 is Jackson Browne and Late for the Sky. So Jackson's, is it his 3rd album? I think it's his 3rd album. I discovered Jackson Browne because I heard the track For a Dancer on an Old Grey Whistle Test LP compilation album. And I thought, what a great storyteller, what a great singer. And I learned that, of course, deep associations with the Eagles and Linda Ronstadt and others in the West Coast, Laurel Canyon kind of thing. And young guy, mature beyond his years, brilliant songwriter. And I saw a video by somebody just a couple of weeks ago talking about Jackson Browne and judging tracks based upon how catchy they were, really. And I think he's a much richer artist than whether he writes good melodies that are great to listen to when you're driving along the freeway or the highway. If you haven't heard Jackson Browne, most of you will have. If you haven't, just think about James Taylor, but with a rhythm section, and a bit punchier in places, but writes about personal relationships a lot, and later got into the political sphere. But it's pretty much all good, and this is a great album. So that's the 5th best album in my judgment of 1974. Number 4 is King Crimson and Red. This is almost a brand new band after Robert Fripp kept splitting up the band. That's on the Island label, you can see here. And he brought into the band John Wetton on bass guitar and vocals, and Bill Bruford for this album on drums. And this is notable mainly for the title track, which is really aggressive, but also the beautiful, with a kind of a punchy interlude in the middle, but beautiful 12-minute closer, which is called Starless. Wonderful vocals, wonderful mellotron, but it's a for a trio they make such a hell of a racket, but really interesting, and this stands the test of time beautifully. Hasn't aged at all in my book. 3rd best album of 1974 is The Silent Corner and the Empty Stage by Peter Hammill. Peter Hammill, the vocalist in Van de Graaff Generator. His 3rd solo album, but it might as well be a Van de Graaff Generator album because he basically has the band playing on this, with David Jackson on saxophones and flute. You've got Hammill on piano, little bit of guitar on here, but he wasn't no great guitarist. Then you got Hugh Banton on organ and Guy Evans on drums. It's very wordy. Here's the lyric sheet. Very wordy, but it is absolutely fabulous. Kind of progressive. He's super intelligent guy. Just wonderful lyricist. Always said that with Peter Hammill, you listen at the end of a listening session, you feel more intelligent than you did at the beginning. You learn something from him every time. The 2nd best album of 1974 is, this is coming out from left field, I'm sure, but this is Barclay James Harvest live. Now, Barclay James Harvest, kind of a progressive, but definitely a song-based rock band of the late 60s and 70s. And this they've been going right up to the present day, to much less acclaim, but they're very influenced by the Beatles. Wasn't so obvious in these days, but late period Beatles, White Album stuff. But here you've got very different and very dynamic versions of and extended versions of songs that appeared on the studio albums, and this whole sound is a lot fuller and more dynamic and punchy than on those studio versions. But here you've got Side 1, Summer Soldier and Medicine Man. One thing that's really, I'm not going to go through all the tracks because you probably don't know them, but Barclay James Harvest live is great. There you go, you've actually got lyrics for a live album. Thing to notice to be notable, the keyboard player Wooly Wolstenholme played a lot of mellotron. John Lees had a very clean sounding and melodic guitar style as well. But yeah, really great album. My favourite album of 1974, you know what's coming, don't you? The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, Genesis. Now this was going to be the first band I ever saw live in 1974. Two things happened. Steve Hackett, the guitarist, cut his hand, and the tour got postponed. And the second reason why I didn't see them is that my parents wouldn't let me go. So just tough. Sorry, David, you can't go. So I was just had to make do with the album. And I didn't buy this album in 1974. I bought this album in 1975, but it stayed with me ever since. Absolute classic, landmark progressive rock album, where progressive rock got into it's kind of got an urban theme to the story. New York, of course, Broadway, and it talks about, the lead character Peter Gabriel is called Rael, kind of a New York punk, leather jacket, jeans, definitely away from that more pastoral feel of a lot of early 70s progressive rock. So Genesis really pushing the boundary on this album, and it still delivers today, because every time I listen to it, there's kind of new stuff that catches my attention, stuff that I don't believe that I've heard before. But great album, my favorite album of 1974. I don't know how long this video is going to take, but I'll just say one more thing. Around 1974, 73, 74, I started to see albums like this. Music for Pleasure's version of The Planets by Gustav Holst, conducted by Stokowski. And this was cheap, and I began to realize that because I had very little money and it was hard to afford too many brand new rock albums, there were a lot of classical albums kicking around that were cheap, and I thought that was a way of me starting to build a collection of new music that might prove interesting. And of course, if you know The Planets, many of you will, it's a very famous, well-known piece, full of great memorable melodies. It's wonderful. And I thought, well, classical music, what do I need? What am I going to do? So I ended up buying this box set called Gateway to the Classics. I think I bought it from a record club that I was subscribed, and I used to have to buy an album every month. And instead of paying £2.50 or something for a brand new rock album, I think for about £7 I got, I think it's 11 LPs. 11 LPs. And you can see some damp marks on this one, but you can see there's a full range of albums here. 11 LPs, all different styles, from the EMI catalogue, so they're good recordings. Lots of famous stuff, some less famous, but that started me on my journey in 1974 into classical music, which my interest has continued to this day. So there you go, finally got around to doing 1974. 1975 will be next, and I'll see you then. Bye bye.